After the death of Superman, Earth has been left vulnerable to global threats. Sensing the oncoming storm, Bruce Wayne, aka Batman, and Diana Prince, aka Wonder Woman, unite to bring together a team of superpowered beings ready for battle. I'm Dylan Bowden from the PopCulturists with the PopCorn podcast, and this is our review of Justice League. Now, for Warner Brothers and DC, the road to bringing these characters to the big screen has been a bumpy one, and the story behind the scenes has been a struggle worthy of a movie of its own. The DC Extended Universe was a plan to build a shared universe for all the DC superheroes through individual films, similar to Marvel Studios' cinematic universe. It began with Zack Snyder's Man of Steel in 2013, which received mixed reviews and was criticised for being bleak and out of character for the traditionally wholesome and confident Superman, played by Henry Cavill. In October of 2014, Warner Brothers confidently announced their DC movie lineup for the next 6 years, starting with a Batman-Superman movie and Suicide Squad movie in 2016, a Wonder Woman and Justice League Part 1 movie in 2017, The Flash and Aquaman in 2018, Shazam, and a Justice League Part 2 in 2019, which was to be shot back-to-back with Part 1, and a Cyborg and a Green Lantern Corps movie in 2020. Then Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice came out, continuing the bleak tone set by Man of Steel, and added violent out-of-character actions for Ben Affleck's new portrayal of Batman. It was also criticised for several scenes being cut out of the movie, causing a sometimes incoherent plot, and trying to shoehorn in Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman.
She with you?
I thought she was with you.
Suicide Squad followed next and was the most heavily affected by studio interference when they took the artistic vision out of director David Ayer's hands during editing and used a movie trailer company instead to re-edit the film with pop songs as a way to lighten the bleak tone already established in principal photography. With 3 mixed to negative movies, Patty Jenkins' Wonder Woman ushered in a change for the franchise, reinvigorating it with a strong female character, great chemistry between the leads, and was more hopeful and optimistic, reinforcing a positive message of heroism. But Justice League itself had been the movie to suffer most from a magnitude of production issues. Director Zack Snyder's daughter tragically committed suicide during post-production, so both himself and his wife Deborah, a producer on the movie, stepped down to be with their family. Director of the Avengers Joss Whedon was hired to come in and rewrite some of the script and film additional scenes, which ended up being 2 months of extensive reshoots to bring a lighter feel to the movie, both tonally and visually. And original composer Junkie XL, who had worked with Hans Zimmer on Batman v Superman and Wonder Woman's theme, was replaced by long-term comic book movie composer Danny Elfman. The studio, also previously unhappy with Batman v Superman's 2 hour and 31 minute running time, made it mandatory that the final edit of the movie had to be 2 hours. And all the while in between, Ben Affleck has shifted from being announced to write, produce, direct and star in a solo Batman movie, to being cut back to just being actor and producer on the movie, to rumours of him not being interested in continuing his role as Batman in any future movies and trying to get out of his contract.
I agree.
On top of that, purely from a storytelling standpoint, this movie had a lot to do. It had to set up a new villain, provide his backstory, his motivation and his plan, introduce 3 new heroes from scratch in Aquaman, The Flash and Cyborg, again providing backstories, motivations and powers, have Batman and Wonder Woman individually approach each member, convince them to join, and then actually have them join the team dynamic. And most importantly, address the issue of Superman being dead, finding a way to bring him back, bringing him back and getting him back into the headspace to join the good fight, all within the space of the newly allotted 2 hour running time. So the chance of the movie being coherent at all was slim, and from a fanboy standpoint, the anticipation of seeing the Justice League on the big screen for the first time ever was huge. People have been waiting decades since the inception of the Justice League way back in 1960 to see these characters together in a big budget film. So, in spite of all that being said, did Justice League do these characters the justice they deserve? The movie definitely feels like a more traditional superhero movie. It's an easy watch with good guys fighting bad guys and drops all the modern world politics and social allegories that so heavily drove the vision of the DCU since its inception. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing depends on what you want out of your superhero fare. DC have prided themselves on being more real and grounded and not as jokey as its contemporaries, but the exact opposite of that mantra seems to have worked for them here. After a very distinct Zack Snyder slow-mo montage set to a haunting cover version of the song Everybody Knows by Leonard Cohen, the movie moves at a very fast pace and is quick to give the two main heroes a chance to shine. Diana Prince is once again a gentle-spirited, yet fierce warrior and does a great job of giving back to the macho men, especially Bruce Wayne. Growing from lone vigilante to reluctant team player while sharing leadership responsibility with Wonder Woman. Both are played as the veterans to Flash and Cyborg's new kids on the block, and Aquaman is the wild card. The surfer dude bro take on Arthur Curry was an interesting one. Aquaman has always been the lamest of the league in the comics, mocked for his bright orange and green scale costume and ability to talk to fish. Towards the start of the movie, he even takes his coat off to reveal an orange knitted jumper very similar to his comic orange scale shirt, which was a nice little nod, and gets a few jabs from Batman about his fish communication. Momoa's look though is very rock and roll. Ripped and tattooed, knocking back whiskey, he looks like a complete badass. That is until he proceeds to awkwardly flop back in the water. I was looking forward to the way they would convey the underwater world of Atlantis and its inhabitants, and it looks like an interesting combination of underwater photography and green screen. From what was on show, it looked pretty cool, and I'm excited to see more. The Flash is touch and go. They definitely had a take on the character which is wide-eyed and excitable. The outsider new to the world that the audience can relate to, and he does provide some fun moments. Getting excited over the Bat Signal, the Batcave and the Batmobile. His mind moves a million miles an hour and he finds the rest of the world moves at a slow, confusing pace. His makeshift costume wasn't as jarring as promo photos and trailers made it to be, mostly because his face is so visible through the mask that you're mostly just seeing Ezra Miller, even in the costume. Though I can see how if you're not a fan of his goofy face, he can quickly become grating. It was tough casting a new Flash when there was already a highly successful version of the very same character still on the small screen in CW's The Flash, and using the Henry Allen in prison arc again feels like a too soon Spider-Man style reboot. Billy Crudup was alright as Barry Allen's father, but the chemistry John Wesley Shipp and Grant Gustin share together in the TV show is so heart-wrenching that it's hard to watch a subpar version of the same thing. Then again, not everyone will have watched the show, so I guess to them it will be new information. The portrayal of the Flash's superpowers, though, are uninspired and fall into two different categories. Either he is moving slowly against a green screen with bolts of Speed Force lightning surging around him and everyone else is frozen still, or Ezra Miller is standing static, lightning surrounds him, he disappears, and then reappears standing static somewhere else. Again, when a TV series a fraction of a Hollywood budget can represent the Speed Force in different and interesting ways, it's kinda sad. Plus, DC had the advantage of seeing what had been done before with similar big screen speedsters in the clever and awe-inspiring Quicksilver scenes in X-Men Days of Future Past and X-Men Apocalypse, as well as learning from a different kind of lackluster effect in the Avengers Age of Ultron with their own version of Quicksilver. It just seems really lazy. In fact, I've always had an issue with the Snyder version of superpowered action. When his ramping up and down style first appeared in 300, it was cool and something that hadn't really been done before, and didn't look fake because there were real actors performing untaxing moves. From Man of Steel on, 90% of Snyder's action involves actors striking a hero pose, then a CG version of the actor speeds across the room performing a superhuman feat, and then it returns to the actor again striking an end pose. They do it with Superman, Wonder Woman, and even regular non-powered hero Batman, which makes little sense. A similar effect was used in Blade 2, to both great effect and average effect, but that was on a much lower budget and over 15 years ago. Again, more practical stunts would ground the superheroics in reality, rather than just watching a big video game being played. Which brings me to the character I was most worried about, Cyborg. Using motion capture was a really great way to portray his almost entirely mechanical body. Seeing him briefly in the trailer, he looked too shiny, and I was worried the obvious CGI would be jarring, but the combination of practical actor and having him modestly wear clothes over his metallic body at times really worked well. I loved his slow, fluid movements. It's really sold on a compelling performance by newcomer Ray Fisher, showing a man struggling with his identity, fearful of himself, and touching slightly on his inner turmoil. Is he Victor Stone with a cyborg body, or is he a cyborg with what remains of Victor Stone's body? As we don't really have any context as to what he was like before the change, it would be something interesting that his movie could explore. Victor Stone seems to be the character most affected by scenes left on the editing floor, as several shots both pre- and post-Cyborg appear in the trailers, but not in the movie, many of which have completely finished visual effects shots. So I look forward to seeing more of him in the future. On the complete opposite of the spectrum is main villain Steppenwolf. He is an entirely CG character, voiced by Kieran Hines, but there is absolutely no reason for it. I've heard people argue that he's an alien and he's 10 feet tall, so he can't be portrayed by an actor, but then he just looks like an old man. Gandalf was a 10-foot tall old man, but he didn't have to be completely CGI, and not very good CGI at that. In fact, I can't tell the difference between Steppenwolf and Voldemort in the first Harry Potter movie. Steppenwolf never feels like a real threat because he never appears real. Just look at the difference between a CGI Voldemort and an actor bringing a performance augmented by CGI. Which would you say is more threatening? The Wonder Woman movie had a similar problem when they actually did cast an actor in the role of Ares, but used meek David Thewlis to throw audiences off. Once he actually revealed himself as a god, he transformed into a hulking CGI shitstorm. I'd be hard-pressed to tell the difference between Ares or Steppenwolf. I mean, they pretty much both look identical, just with slightly different helmets. Just cast a muscly actor as the villain, it would be a hell of a lot cheaper than unnecessary computer effects. And you might even get an interesting performance. While still on the special effects front, there are long stretches of the movie where the actors are against blatantly obvious green screen, even when they're doing nothing heroic like standing in a cornfield, or standing in a city park, or even just having a conversation. Even the iconic shot of the team standing together looks uncinematic and dumb compared to the same kind of shots so iconic in the similar Avengers. Now, as much as I want to keep the movie and criticism separate from Marvel and DC, I just have to address the fact that both movies involve a group of superheroes coming together to face off against a godlike character in a horned helmet with a staff-like weapon, commanding an army of mindless alien monsters while trying to open a portal between worlds with a cube-shaped alien artifact. The filmmakers could have written a story drawn from thousands of comics, or even crafted their own story. They've had 5 years since the Avengers to do something completely different, and yet they still went with this plot as their best idea. It's hard to judge a movie when you know you're not seeing the full picture. Scenes are commonly deleted from movies because they don't flow well with the overall picture, have information that's already been established elsewhere, or even just didn't turn out like they intended. But this movie announced flat out that it was a version cut down to fit a running time, so it gets more of a pass from me because, as I know, there are several shots across the various trailers that show whole scenes not in the final movie. So this most likely won't be considered the final movie. The extended cut, much like Batman v Superman later had, that fleshed out things that didn't make sense in the theatrical version, will most likely take the honour of the final definitive version. Like I said, DC have prided themselves on being more real and grounded, and there have been instances where more mature superhero fare can be both entertaining, thought-provoking, relevant, and critically and financially successful. But this is not that film. By trying to reverse engineer the Marvel formula, DC have shot themselves in the foot every single step of the way. The chemistry between all the leads is great though. They very quickly feel at home together, and when they all assemble in the end working side by side, it brought a grin to my face. In a world where the Guardians of the Galaxy can be more epic than the most recognised heroes of all time, that's a sad thing. As a light run-of-the-mill middle-tier superhero movie, Justice League fares pretty well. But as the epic assembling of the greatest superheroes of all time, it didn't even come close to its legendary potential. This should come as no surprise, but spoilers, Superman returns. In the comics, Superman went into a type of Kryptonian hibernation chamber and returned in a black suit with a mullet. Here, they used the elements already established to bring him back from the dead, by grave robbing and shocking him back to life with the help of the amniotic fluid in Zod's ship that Lex Luthor used to create Doomsday in BVS. I wasn't too concerned about this, as in the comics it seemed like more of a convenient plot device made up by the writers on the fly rather than deep-seated mythology, but I can see how digging up and desecrating a dead body could turn some people off. I think this is the best version of Superman we've seen in the DCEU. The suit's colouring has been lightened, he smiles, he quips, he seems to enjoy what he's doing, he brings joy to people when he's around, instead of instilling alien-like fear in previous movies. Batman goes around telling people Superman was a beacon of hope, and the best of humanity, but most of the society conveyed in past movies hated him. The battle he has with the League after waking up disorientated is the best in the movie, especially when the Flash tries to run up behind him, and he ever so slowly turns around in slow motion to follow him with his eyes. Another major production issue that affected the final film is a mustache that Henry Cavill grew for his role in Mission Impossible 6. When Cavill came back for reshoots on Justice League, Paramount, the studio behind the Mission Impossible franchise, refused to let Cavill shave it, meaning he had a mustache in all the reshoots, and then it was digitally removed later, leaving scenes with him having a weird hairpin lip in close-ups. It baffles me that Paramount wouldn't let him shave his mustache and wear a fake one on their movie. The cost of digitally removing a mustache to the cost of getting a fake one must be staggering. And on top of that, it looks horrible and incredibly distracting at times. I don't know why they couldn't get it right. I mean, if they can make Michael Douglas look 30 years younger in Ant-Man, why can't they take a moustache off somebody's face for 5 minutes? What makes it even more ironic is that production on Mission Impossible 6 was halted due to an injury Tom Cruise sustained during a stunt, so he could have just shaved it off and grew it back later anyway. Mark Kent and Lois Lane are used sparingly in the movie, but the first scene that Mark Kent appeared in was incredibly distracting. It was though she was either blind or had turned into a bobblehead. Jeremy Irons was great once again as Alfred, sarcastically muttering under his breath in every scene. And J.K. Simmons was there as Commissioner Gordon. He had a moustache, people called him Jim. He turned on the bat signal a couple of times. But does anybody remember all those still photos of him working out really hard and getting ripped for the movie? What was that about? Physically, Affleck is still incredibly imposing as Batman, but he never gets a chance to shine like he did in the warehouse scene in Batman vs Superman. I think if anyone drew the short straw on action, it's Batman. He grapples uninterestingly multiple times, he has very little hand-to-hand combat, and has no less than 4 vehicle changes in the movie. Past movies, especially Batman and Robin, were torn apart for their attempt to shoehorn in unnecessary vehicles just to sell toys. Now I get that Batman's gadgets and vehicles have always been a staple of the character, and they've made sense for the most part. He can't just walk everywhere, he would need a car to get places, so why not make it Bat-themed? If he needs to get somewhere that a car is too far to reach, then a plane would make sense. If there was danger on the water, I guess a boat would make sense too. But when you need to go down a narrow tunnel to get below Gotham Harbor, I don't really know if the most obvious choice would be a giant mechanical crab spider bat thing. Now speaking of action figures, towards the end of the movie, Batman changes into a different Batsuit for the climactic final battle. For no reason, it has a silver gloss, weird vents on the sides of the cowl, and stupid looking goggles. The suit actually looks almost identical to George Clooney's equally stupid Arctic suit in Batman and Robin. I guess after Warner Brothers got not 1, not 2, but 3 different Batman action figures out of Batman v Superman, they just got greedy and couldn't stop themselves. Still on the topic of Batman, also known as the world's greatest detective, he doesn't realize that Barry Allen is fast before meeting him? Really?
So you're fast.
Even with that none too subtle email to Wonder Woman showing security camera footage of him flashing about? Yet, at the same time, he somehow knows that there is a man that comes on the king tide delivering fish to a tiny fishing village halfway around the world, that his name is Arthur Curry, also known as Aquaman, and that he may or may not talk to fish? Doesn't make sense. Another thing that doesn't really make sense, terrorists break into a bank / museum / courthouse. It's never really clear, but there's a school excursion there, so I guess an excursion to a bank wouldn't be much fun, so it's probably not a bank. Anyway, the terrorists open up a suitcase with enough explosives to level 4 surrounding blocks. They don't plan to leave. It's clearly a suicide bombing, and Wonder Woman bursts in and saves the day just in time. We know this because there's a timer on the bomb, but if it's a suicide bomb, then why the fuck does it even need a timer? Just press the detonator and blow yourself up straight away. Doesn't make sense. There's also several times that the movie cuts back to a Russian family boarded up in a small house just outside the nuclear power plant where Steppenwolf has set up base. There's at least 4 scenes with them all building up to the gag that Flash saves this single family, and yet Superman carries an entire building full of people away. It's a great funny moment, but they could have just had them scared in the house with that one scene at the end and still used that joke. It's strange they decided to keep all of those scenes in, especially considering the limited runtime. There are also 2 post-credit scenes, one midway through involving the Flash and Superman racing each other in the ultimate geek fan service evoking Superman issue 199, and the other involving Lex Luthor and a really good Deathstroke cosplayer, discussing something about setting up a league of their own. Can't wait to see that crossover.
There's no crying in baseball!
The combination of Snyder and Whedon's styles never bothered me in the final film. It was less of a clash of vision from two different directors and more of a clash of committee choices made by executives. It's strange that after seemingly course-correcting their franchise, they just announced that they've decided to give up and try different things. There's potential for an amazing sequel with the cast they've assembled here, but I don't know if it's just a case of too little too late, especially considering the extremely disappointing box office this movie made on opening weekend. If this was made in a time before the golden age of comic book movies, when Iron Man and the Dark Knight changed everything in 2008, it would have fit perfectly amongst the original X-Men in 2000 as a movie where the effects weren't quite amazing, some characters were completely changed for plot convenience, but they nailed the ones that count and there was enough potential to build on. But in this day of faithful, high-end cinema adaptations of beloved comic book heroes, it's average to okay at best.